Hi, everybody. April 15th, as we keep struggling on in our little pandemic. Today, I want to talk to you about a band called the Ashtray Hearts. They put out 3 albums. The first one is Old Numbers from 2002. The second one is Perfect Halves from 2005. And the third one is The Strangest Light from 2013. Now, the first album is absolutely spectacular. And how I found out about these guys is I actually played a couple of shows with them. I opened for them at the Maple Court in Scotland, Inverness, Scotland, on July 19th, 2003. And then the next day on the 20th, I played the Tyne Bar in Newcastle upon Tyne. It was an outdoor barbecue with a whole bunch of bands, and that was my first date with Phil Lee, Jake Berger from Nashville. And they were also part of the group that played that whole gig. And it was really interesting because it was, everybody was loving all this, the country stuff out there. They love Americana. And, there was a bunch of British bands that were all dressed up, and girls had their hair done like 50s style, and they were all singing like Coast Riders in the Sky. But we were the headliners, because we were the real American, country guys. It was an interesting thing. But the Ashtray Hearts have this, they're from Minneapolis, and they have this really, really cool sound. It's, they call themselves apartment rock, and it's really it really makes you feel about the Midwest. Just this, they're kind of dreary and kind of just. It feels like the movie. Listening to them feels like you're listening to the movie. Watch the soundtrack to the movie, The Last Picture Show. Like you're stuck in this Midwestern town, going nowhere. It's really peculiar. I really like them. The second and third album are pretty good. They're okay, but this first album is just stellar from start to finish. Old Numbers. But what was really interesting about this is in the middle of the liner notes here, there's a short story called The Bear. And it was written by Aaron Schmidt, who was the trumpet player. Yeah, he did trumpet, piano, and some vocals. He wasn't the lead vocalist. So he wrote, and it was a larger band. It was, there was like an accordion player, a bass player, a drummer, then there was a vocalist, played acoustic guitar, and then another guitar, banjo, piano, and it was just this rotating, interesting lineup of guys that just played, really, really good band. If you could check them out, the Ashtray Hearts, Old Numbers is their first. And the other two, all of the 3, this is amazing. The other 2 are good, but this one's absolutely stellar. And so I'm going to take the time to read their short story, Aaron Schmidt's short story, called The Bear. Jenkins honks now. Again. He did it this afternoon as he barreled past in his awful truck. I was sitting on the front step of the house, looking at the scar that cuts through my front yard. Jenkins honks to me as some sort of greeting, as if I were one of whatever he is. His pickup has a bellowing baritone horn that sounds like a steamship in a fog. I'm sure he works in the office down at the foundry pushing papers like I do at the bank, but he still has this mammoth vehicle that looks like it could haul 30 of the deer he and his sons hunt in the fall. The honk startled me into a half-hearted wave, which I immediately regretted and tried to pull back. Too late. Because I don't want to give him any ideas. He suddenly likes me again. Because of that poor bear. Though it won't be long before he changes his mind. He hasn't found out yet. This first fall we lived here, Allison made me go next door to look when he pulled into his driveway and stood there whooping with his 2 blaze orange kids. They got one, she said, as she nudged the small of my back with her hand. She had these bony knuckles that straddled my vertebrae. Go be a neighbor, she followed up by saying, for me? So I went, because I didn't have a rebuttal for that. I hadn't even reached the fence that split our yards when Jenkins spotted me and waved me over, jumping and calling like he'd found part of a golden sky or the last of the albino buffalo. Jenkins was short and stocky, and what hair he had left was plastered to his skull. the effects of an orange stocking cap that he had gripped in one hand. When he yanked down the gate to show off his animal, the thing looked dead and helpless and tiny, though he said, "Nice-looking spike buck, eh?" and clapped me on the back. He pointed toward his sons in the garage. "Ronnie's a regular bullseye champ." "Yeah," I said, pretending to be impressed. "Oh, yeah." He probably thought that I was trying to read the numbers on the tag when I was really trying to figure out how many dead deer he could fit in the bed. Oh, how he could stack the helpless in there. As soon as I noticed the tongue sticking from the side of the deer's mouth through yellow teeth, I realized that I might not be able to stomach the responsibility of becoming a neighbor to this man. A month later, when Jenkins appeared on the front door bellowing man talk about sports and fishing and handed over a stick of venison sausage, I promptly threw the sausage in the garbage as soon as he was gone, before Allison could see me do it. From the little I knew about sausage, I couldn't stop thinking about the tongue finding its way into a saltine cracker. We kept on like neighbors, though, Jenkins and I, holding 5-minute conversations over the cedar rail fence about Milwaukee's relief pitching and mortgage rates. I couldn't avoid him whenever I left the house. He was always working on his yard. He mentioned often that we should go golfing. I waffled. I mostly stood leaning on the rail thinking of an excuse to go inside before he got started on about how his older kid had done wrestling at 112 last season. We had neighborly conversations like that until Allison left. There was plenty of warning signs that pointed to her leaving, and they became crystal clear as I started at the reflection of the television lights on the ceiling during my first 10 or so hours alone. "I think I want my old job back," she had told me more than once. She'd been a legal assistant at a big firm before we moved. Here she worked for Jim Kahn, a do-anything-at-all lawyer with an office out by the highway bypass. It seemed pretty similar to me, and I said that once. I shouldn't have said that. "It's airlines and gas companies versus divorce and bill collection," she said, exasperated, and Jim asked too many questions. Then she locked herself in the bathroom for one of her 2-hour baths. I couldn't really comprehend the times when she had said she wanted to be closer to her family, but to tell the truth, I never had much of a light in my eye for family. In our 3 years together, we never quite discussed having children. I ignored things. Winced eyes and sighs, the rolls away from me in bed that came early at night. I ignored them in the name of being married, because I didn't know how it was really supposed to be. So I guess I shouldn't have felt entirely ambushed when I came home early one afternoon to find her hatchback full of clothes. It was overflowing. Sleeves and lace and the corners of green towels were pouring out of the rectangular back windows. I knew what the towels meant. She met me at the garage door with dresses on hangers that were bent over her arms. The muscles on her forearms were taut in effort. "This isn't enough for me," she said. She said we needed a break, which wasn't entirely true. The we part. I told her, but the rolling of her eyes made me realize we were probably on a different page. So I got out of her way and sat on the back porch until she left. I wasn't going to cry in front of her, especially since the decision was already made. People have to make choices all the time. And I wasn't about to start stepping on her life then, when she was unhappy. But when she was packing all of her belongings packed into that car, I wonder what it meant to take a break. I thought I treated her well, best I knew, so all I could do was step aside. Not that I wasn't cut up about it, but I saw it as something similar to wait for the firing squad. Despite having a pretty good idea as to what your future is. The moment of the shot and that feeling you still have to catch you by surprise. The moment of the shot and that feeling still have to catch you by surprise. I felt my own recoil while sitting in the plastic mesh lawn chair as she turned over that wheezing 4-cylinder engine. All I could think about was a night All I could think about that night was how I never understood her. How she'd made it seem so easy all in one car. How she could have had a much nicer car if she hadn't needed all those clothes. How she could have convinced me to move closer to her family if she tried. 3 weeks later, almost a year ago, I FedExed the things she left in the kitchen drawer, her passport and her social security card, the important paper things. This is her identity, I thought, during my 25-mile drive to find somewhere with a FedEx sign. From the course of our random phone conversations, I'd been expecting divorce papers in return, though I always hoped that they didn't seal my identity as a young divorcee or a loner, or maybe in the future as one of those middle-aged guys who just walks around giving up hope about one thing after another. But she's got a new job in downtown Chicago and at least one good prospect. I'm sure from a group of men who have their own offices with windows and make big bucks. I read that incorrectly. Let me say it. But she's got a new job in downtown Chicago and at least one good prospect, I'm sure, from a group of men who have their own offices with windows and make big bucks. I always thought I was prepared for those papers. Jenkins wasn't prepared for the news. I'm not sure what details reached him or how skewered they were, but I live in a town of 8,500 people, the kind of town where rumors have a half-life of 36 hours. Jenkins was a turkey carving, church choir, little league baseball coach family man, so it makes sense that he didn't understand the fact that my theoretical wife lived 5 hours south. We met one Tuesday afternoon a couple of weeks after she left, both setting out our garbage cans. How's Allison, he asked with a holy smirk, which told me he knew some version of the events. Don't know. It was true. She wouldn't call until next Saturday. She might have lost a limb or an eye, as far as I could tell. God, at that point I wished I knew. But it was early enough in the morning that I hadn't yet thought of lying. Jenkins looked up the street and exhaled in a light whistle, as if he couldn't stand to look. Then he took a deep breath to prepare. Where I'm from, we fight for our women. Ain't always easy, but you do it. He slammed his aluminum trash can down on the edge of the curb. You just gotta change yourself. I mean, you weren't smacking her around, were you? I could picture the Jenkins household dinners over the last week and the blanket warnings to his sons about growing up like me, a man who doesn't hunt or fish or even let his wife leave him because she wasn't happy or because he must have been secretly torturing her. Beware. Stay clear. Gotta get to work, Carl, I said. I left the second garbage can in the garage. For a long while after that, until the bear, there wasn't much contact between us beyond stolid glances over the cedar posts that separated our yards. I started working on my yard in earnest a couple of weeks after Jenkins' sermon. I'd been uninterested beyond sloppy lawn mowing when she was around, but I told myself I needed something to fill the time, a way to break up the monotony of processing mortgages and car loans all day, and to wear me out so I could break my recently formed habit of staying up late, watching infomercials and yacht racing on cable. Plus, I decided that my house had become an eyesore, especially next to the Jenkins scissor-cut greens and perfectly Firestone landscaping. I plotted out some flower beds in the back around the trees, tiled under the sun-starved sod, and found plants at the hardware store nursery that had labels claiming they would grow in low light. I replaced my faded vinyl siding with some cedar siding I had in my garage every night for 3 weeks, double-coated every board with a bluish-gray stain and letting them dry for the contractors I hired to nail it all up. I had them repaint the flaking white trim. I bought a spreader and seeded and fertilized my lawn in the most precise fashion I have done anything in my life. One Saturday, I overheard Jenkins' youngest son asking him what I was doing as I shoveled wood chips along the side of the garage closest to their house. He called his son over and whispered in his ear probably something like, "Trying to make himself look like a decent man, son." or simply camouflage. I was in the midst of my lawn mowing ritual the second time this week when the bear came. It came running. I had just begun my fourth pass away from the curb when I saw a police squad car speeding across the lawn of the nursing home across the street. A charging black bear ahead, in fact, pulling away and both of them kicking up dust as they came right at me. I released the grip, killing the motor, but when the bear hit the street, I froze. As he ran, I swear the bear glanced up at me through his eyes, held a look that I would classify closer to indifference than the shock that it must have been in mine. When he changed his course 10 degrees to the right and loped past me at a flash and on into my backyard, his legs churning awkwardly, effortlessly, if I could have moved an arm, his glossy coat would have been just out of my reach. I followed the bear around the garage into the back. He came to rest under a maple tree, panting and turning his head back and forth. I stood and watched as the bear's chest heaved. The squad car stayed in the street. Heard it on my scanner. Jenkins with a camera. Some people listen to music. Jenkins had a police scanner. It was the first time he'd spoken to me directly since the garbage cans. "Don't be afraid. He's scared out of his mind," he said, walking past me and closer to the bear. He started snapping pictures. Hurriedly manual clicking followed each artificial flash. Black bears are mostly vegetarian. Through the backyards, I could see more police cars now, parked or making slow laps around the block, all trying to locate the wild animal that had settled down under the tree in a few yards in front of Jenkins and his camera. "Incredible," he said, when the bear opened his jaws to utter a response to a large step closer. "Never been close to one this big." Instead, they circled slowly, clean and official vultures, using their PA systems to announce, "There's a bear in your backyard. Please stay inside your homes. There's a bear in your backyard." "Here, come take this camera. Film's gone," Jenkins said. An order, not a question. Not turning to me, but only reaching back with one tanned arm. I inched up slowly until I found myself next to Jenkins, and enraptured with the bear, which, though it lay on the ground, seemed to exude complete anarchy, eyes never stopping and muscles tensing under his coat. Somehow, his lack of large movements made him seem more out of control to me, wild and uncontainable, unpredictable, untamed. I remember stepping back, thinking that the bear could at that moment do anything, attack Jenkins or me, or run for the edge of town. It could exact any vengeance it chose. And for some reason, it chose to climb the stubbly maple and lodge itself above one low-hanging limb that bent with its weight. I felt my stomach wrap around itself. On the ground, the bear seemed to be in control, but wedged above the limb, he seemed desperately out of his element, a backyard circus act. The local game warden arrived and found the bear in the same position 10 minutes later. The squad car still in the street, sporadically announcing the bear's presence, warning about pets and children. The warden knew Jenkins, probably from Sunday service at the Lutheran church. "You see the red tag on his ear, Carl? That's a final warning we use. A third strike kind of thing. I'm afraid this animal will have to be destroyed." He explained that this bear had most likely lost all natural instincts and now knew only an urban existence, garbage cans and dumpsters in towns all around. He thought it had been traced to Door County and back. "It's a danger to kids, pets, what have you. This one's been knocked down and relocated at least twice, but he keeps coming back to civilization. There's nothing else we can do." The street was cleared in preparation. The warden went to his truck and returned with 2 shotguns. He turned to me. "There ain't anybody inside, is there?" Jenkins had already grabbed one of his guns and was squinting through the sights at the bear. "No, my wife won't be back for another month." So far as I knew, she wasn't coming back. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I just wanted to fit in with these men for a moment. Maybe the way the warden asked was just too matter of fact. I wanted to make them feel that they didn't understand everything, despite what they had heard. Maybe the event itself was so bizarre that I simply clung to the camaraderie of the situation. I don't know. I don't have any explanation for my actions. I started slipping down the slope. I couldn't come back. Really now, Jenkins said. Well, that's damn good news. That might be debatable, Carl, the warden said, nodding at me. They chuckled. I chuckled too. I laughed a real laugh, like everything was going to happen exactly like I said. I laughed like I believed my own lie. My wife was going to be sorry she didn't make it back in time for this bear excitement. I moved out of the way as Jenkins and the warden fixed their line of sight on the back of my garage. Stand back, there's no telling, no stray bullets, Jenkins, the warden said, and laughed. When he stops moving, you stop shooting. When the warden nodded to Jenkins, I stepped further back behind a tree. The first shot echoed harshly between the houses, but the bear merely shifted his claws on the trunk and growled. Blue cedar splintered from just below the roofline. Jesus, clean miss, Jenkins said. But the warden squeezed the trigger of his gun, and it was over. The bear's front claws hung to the bark and held momentarily until its weight broke the grip, and he fell with a thump onto the bed of hostas. I had planted in the spring. Jenkins whooped in excitement as his shotgun echoed one last time, an unnecessary shot to the head to finish the poor dead animal, splattering more of its blood on the remaining plants. I walked over to Jenkins and clasped down on his shoulder, which at the time felt like a fond memory of burly strength, perhaps a wrestler's like his son. 1 for 2 isn't bad, neighbor, I said, though Ronnie might have done a little better. Then my phone rang. I excused myself and bounded up onto the porch and through the sliding door. My hello was too excited. It was Allison. Before she said anything, I felt like saying, Honey, you missed it. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my temples. I was thinking in exclamation marks. What's new? I asked. I don't think I ever asked her that question. I'm moving, she said seriously. Then she didn't say anything for a while. I asked her where. It doesn't matter. When I asked her what she meant by that, she told me she was moving somewhere where I couldn't call or visit anyway. She exhaled right into the phone. I'm moving with someone, she said. Once I realized what was happening, I got belligerent. Mostly because that was all I could do. Asking questions that came from a place inside me that held all of the frustration I'd stowed away. Frustrations I knew I'd never dealt with. The questions sounded ridiculous coming from my mouth, but I was spinning too much to listen and kept going until she broke down and asked me to quit yelling. She said it wasn't an easy decision and something else that I categorized as a bad excerpt from a 15-year-old's diary. Something about life moving along or going on, and then about picking herself back up. It was when the line went silent. That was when the line went silent. We were both waiting for tears, I think, but despite the feeling that I should cry, I couldn't conjure anything up. In the phone, her steady breathing sounded like her sleep. I thought about how long she planned this conversation. She used to sit in front of the phone for half an hour every time she ordered something from a catalog or made an appointment at the doctor. This must have been a meditation session worthy of a sick day home from work. I hoped it was. Doing this to me deserved at least 2 hours, I wanted to ask her. As some sort of meaningless salvage of the worst kind, I hoped it wasn't too easy to leave for good. So I probably should call the realtor tomorrow, I said instead. She said that wouldn't be necessary. You can keep it. She said she'd always been independent, and she still was now. Independent with whom, I didn't know. I have to admit I was picturing a corner office with a view of the Sears Tower when she said goodbye. Her framed picture was sitting on a glossy mahogany desk, and in it she looked happier, wearing an I need you smile she never gave me. She had to repeat her goodbye to bring me out of my daze. It's almost right, I said. I owed her for that shit she had said about picking herself back up. You know, circumstances. Sometimes it was pretty good. I hung up. I walked to the living room and reached for the television remote, searching for something to dull my senses. and suddenly realized I still had Jenkins's camera. I remember what I said to them. Not for another month. It made me angry. Not because I believed it when I said it, just because I didn't actually disbelieve it. I felt cheap and weak, like a priest who can't stop himself from coveting and stealing and lying. I felt so lonely that I reached out, only to remember that I was reaching out to a bastard of a man. I gripped his shoulder as if he were a brother. His proof, his stories to his children, the bear itself, lay in my hands. I could see Jenkins down at the office, so proud of his special bear picture. Yep. Well, we had no choice. Menace to society, you know. Dangerous, a real mean sucker. Had to protect the town. I mean, look at those teeth. I turned on the lamp next to the sofa. I flipped over the camera and opened the clasp on the back, lifting the film out and drowning it with light, turning the film every angle imaginable, 3 inches from the bulb to erase all that could be of that animal, of Jenkinson's memory of the bear of mine. I did it because I was a traitor to that bear. I was the only one who could have understood his plight, and all I could bring myself to do was congratulate Jenkins for blowing his innocent, already dead brains all over my lawn. I rolled the film back in, closed the camera, and laid back on the couch. When I woke a couple of hours later, the body was gone, as were the police. I picked up the camera and walked through the yard, knocking on Jenkins' back door. Thankfully, his son answered. Hey, kid, I said, could you give this to your dad? I opened the screen door a crack and reached a hand out, never saying a word. As I was walking back to the house, I saw the lawnmower near the mailbox where I had stopped 4 passes from the street. I saw the scar across the front yard that marked my path, and I knew that I should finish. But for a moment, I remembered when Jenkins' son had asked him what I was doing working on my yard like that. I didn't have an answer anymore. I made a mental note to call the realtor when I got inside. I grabbed the lawnmower and pushed it into the garage. I went around back to look at the 3 bullet holes in my new cedar siding. I saw the depression in the dirt and the crushed plants where he had landed, and the blood. I stood in the spot for a while, just to see. Then I started climbing the maple tree. I put my fingers in the claw marks on the first branch, on the shine of sap on white wood, and lifted my legs up. I sat for a while on that limb. I went higher, up, I kept going until I was beyond the point where I felt safe. When I had to stop, I didn't glance next door to see if anyone was watching. I rocked back and forth. I wished more than anything to make that tree fall right at that moment upon my luscious barefoot lawn and strategically placed flower beds, upon those gray-blue beveled boards and glistening white windowsills, which now belonged entirely and solely to me. I knew then that the scar in my lawn would stay until I figured something out. I decided to purposely cut it in, twice every week until I can sell the house. It would stay out of consideration for the bear. That was The Bear by Aaron Schmidt, which was inside the liner notes for the Ashtray Hearts' first album, Old Numbers. So everybody, I want to once again, let's stay home. Let's stay safe. Thank you very, very much to our health workers out there and to all of you that are essential workers that are working at, that made my sub today, that work at the supermarkets when I go get food. Thank you so very, very much. Peace, everybody. Be safe.